afternoon, everybody. My name is Daniel Gall, and I'm presenting my paper on translation of cognitive models to constraint handling rules. So first of all, what is computational cognitive modeling? It wants to explore human cognition by building detailed computational models of cognitive processes like counting, learning languages, so everything intelligent humans do. To support cognitive modeling, cognitive architectures have developed. They integrate a psychological theory, and on top of that, cognitive modelers try to build domain-specific models. And they use the knowledge from psychology that is integrated in the cognitive architecture. And one of those cognitive architectures that is very popular is adaptive control of thought, rational, which is abbreviated with ACT-R. ACT-R is a symbolic approach. It is a rule-based system, a production rule system, and it has a well-defined psychological theory. So it has a lot of integrated facts and features about memory and about how the human mind is organized. There are a lot of models that are validated for ACT-R that are validated by experiments that have been performed with humans. So it is used a lot, but it also has some limitations. Its computational theory is not defined formally. So it doesn't have an operational semantics in a formal manner. This leads to implementations with a lot of technical artifacts, and it inhibits computational analysis, for example, for complexity or for confluence or other computational features. In our own work, we have defined a formal operational semantics that is adaptable, so it can capture many different implementations and flavors of ACT-R that are out there. And it captures really the essence of the procedural system with the possibility to extend it by all the surroundings that are needed to implement this huge psychological theory. For this work, we abstract from timings, particular conflict resolution strategies, and so on. So we abstract from details to simplify analysis of the core system of the production system. So our goal of this work is we want to have the first implementation that is based on the current formal operational semantics. Therefore, we translated cognitive models that are written in ACT-R to constraint handling rules, and this translation is sound and complete with respect to our operational semantics. And this paves the way for using CHR analysis tools to analyze cognitive models. So this talk is mainly about the translation of cognitive models to CHR. And so what we will see is how can we translate an ACT-R model to a CHR program. And the first step for that is that we look into the states of an ACT-R model. So how do the states of an ACT-R model look? ACT-R has one kind of knowledge that is called declarative knowledge, that are static facts like, for example, Barack Obama is president of the United States. Such knowledge is represented as chunks that are connected by so-called labeled slots, and the chunks are typed. The types determine the slots of the chunks. Chunks are immutable, and here is a little example. We have a chunk P that has the type parent, and in its mother slot it has Alice, in its father slot it has Bob, and in its child slot John. So what we have is the fact that Alice and Bob are parents of the child John. So a very simple fact. As I said, ACT-R is a production rule system, and its core production system is in the so-called procedural module. we find the declarative knowledge, so our chunks, in the declarative module. And the procedural module cannot access all the facts at one time. But it only has access to one fact, one chunk from the declarative module that is in the retrieval buffer. So buffers can only hold one chunk, at most one chunk at a time. And there are different buffers for different cognitive features. So what we have seen is the declarative knowledge is in the declarative module. There's also a goal module that keeps track of the current goal of our model. And even for communicating with the environment, we also have modules. And again, they also offer buffers that only can hold one chunk at a time. So the next step now is how do the rules look like? So the second type of knowledge in ACT-R is procedural knowledge in form of production rules. And the production rules match the current state of the buffers. And we can modify those chunks by direct modification, where we can exchange one value, or one individual value, for example, of one chunk in one buffer. We can request modules to put a new chunk into its buffer, and we can clear buffers. So those are the atomic modifications that we allow. So for example, this could be a very simple ACT-R state that only has one buffer, the retrieval buffer. And additionally to what I have said is that buffers can have a delay. So only if the delay is 0, the procedural module can see what is in the buffer. In this case, the delay is 0, so our procedural system has access to this chunk, P prime. And as you see, something got mixed up, and our model has memorized the wrong fact. Alice is father of John, and Bob is mother of John. So we could have a simple rule that flips around those two slots. Rules look like this. They have this precondition with tests. Tests are marked by this equal sign. And we test the retrieval buffer for a chunk of type parent. And it must have X in its mother slot and Y in its father slot. And if this is the case, then, so X and Y are variables. If this is the case, then we can modify what we mark with, again, with an equality sign. The retrieval buffer, the chunk in the retrieval buffer, it still has a chunk of type parent in it, and we flip around X and Y. So the result of this rule, after it has been applied, is that Alice and Bob are exchanged, and we get our former chunk P. Of course, this rule can be applied again, so we would have to use a more sophisticated rule. But this is just a simple example. Requests look like this. Again, we test for some X that is mother and some Y that is father. And this time we want to request the module behind the retrieval buffer, which is the declarative module, for a chunk of type parent. And again, we want a chunk that has X in its mother slot and Y in its father slot. So what we are doing is we are requesting, for example, another child of Alice and Bob. And we are lucky, we get a chunk P2 prime with child Martha. But we could also have retrieved, again, John. So what you see here now is that we have a delay of, for example, 2, because the declarative module takes some time to put its answer in it. So this answer is only visible to the system after 2 seconds. The last action that we have in ACT-R is a clearing. Again, we have this chunk in our retrieval buffer, and we check again for the same thing, but this time we have the constants Alice and Bob directly in the slots. And in that case, we want to clear the retrieval buffer, and then the result is that we have the special chunk nil in the buffer. So this is just that you get idea of how ACT-R works and looks like. So now comes the main part of the talk, and this is how can we translate such models to CHR programs. And therefore, I first explain to you CHR. The data of objects of CHR are so-called constraints that are first-order logic predicates. And we have rules in different types of rules. For this talk, only one type of rule is of interest. It's the so-called sympagation rule, where we have a conjunction of constraints HK and a conjunction of constraints HR, a guard and a body. And if the constraints in the head, that is HK and HR, match, find matching constraints in a constraint store, then they are either kept, so the constraints that match HK are kept and the constraints that match HR are removed. But only if the guard holds. CHR differentiates between two types of constraints: user-defined constraints that can appear in the head and in the body, and so-called built-in constraints that it gets from the host language. Usually this is Prolog, but there are also C and Haskell and whatever implementations. And those are usually simple tests that say yes or no to a question. So, and such constraints can appear in the guard and in the body of a rule. Yes?
Clarification question. Is there significance to the fact that the arrow is two-directional there?
Yes, this comes from the declarative semantics of CHR, because such types of this type of rule matches the implication in both sides, so the equivalence.
So
in the declarative semantics.
Thanks.
But it is, it has some effects on completeness, of course. But okay. So now we look into the translation. Our translation is sound and complete with respect to our operational semantics, but it is not a one-to-one correspondence of transitions. We use macro steps to model one ACT-R transition in more than one CHR transition. However, this does not inhibit soundness and completeness, because we have only finitely many intermediate steps, and the computation of to get from this CHR version of state sigma 1 to sigma 2 cannot be interfered. So we will finally be in this state, and then we can apply the next ACT-R transition. So now, how can we translate states? The cognitive states of ACT-R are translated to constraints, to a constraint store, and it looks like this. So the data objects of ACT-R are chunks. Chunks have slot value pairs, and we represent such slot value pairs as constraints chunk has slot, name, slot, and value. So think of it as a relation. The connection to the buffer can be simply modeled by a buffer constraint with the buffer name, the chunk name, the type of the chunk in the buffer, and the delay. So here again is our famous example with Alice and Bob. And in CHR, this chunk has slot relation that the chunk P has Alice in its mother slot looks like this. So it's CHS P mother Alice. And of course, we can do this for the other slots as well. And the buffer, the connection here, looks like this in CHR. So we have the buffer name retrieval, the name of the chunk, its type parent, and the delay 0. The next step is how can we translate production rules. So I only give examples in this talk. The formalization of this stuff can be found in the paper. So we formalized our translation process, but I only want to give you an idea of how we do it in this talk. To translate production rules, we first have to translate tests. so conditions. So what we are interested in is this part of the rule, where we check if the retrieval buffer has a chunk of type parent and this chunk has this chunk slot pairs, slot value pairs. Sorry. So what we are looking for first is a constrained buffer with the buffer name retrieval, some chunk C that is a variable, the type parent, and delay 0. Then we look for those slot value pairs. So we have chunk has slot constraints. For the same chunk C, we want to have that it has X in its mother slot and Y in its father slot. So in the constraints, though, there somehow must be a matching constraint for those 3 constraints. The next step is important since chunks are immutable. We need to know all values of the slots because we have to create a copy of a chunk. So we also have to check for all the other slots of that type. And we know that type parent has mother, father, and child as slots, and there are no other slots. And we introduce a new variable, C. In this step, this part of constraints are kept because we don't want to remove a chunk from our declarative knowledge just because it matches a rule. But what we want to remove is this buffer relation because we want to put a new chunk in this buffer. So this is the kept part of the rule and this is the removed part of the rule. As I said before, it is important that our macro steps aren't interfered in their calculation. So we need somehow a method to find out when all actions have been performed. Therefore, we add a fire constraint that allows us to fire the rule. And only then it is allowed to fire such rules. And we immediately remove it if the rule matches, because it is also on the right-hand side of this dash. And then on the right-hand side of the rule, we have the actions. And this is the next step. Now let's see how we can translate those actions. For the translation of actions, we introduce a meta constraint because actions usually do the same stuff. They modify some slots. So we have a meta constraint that does this for us with a meta rule that is a part of every program. This meta constraint just has the name of the chunk that should be modified, and it has a list of slot value pairs that this chunk should have in the end. This is also important because in the actions, the slots are only known at runtime, so we cannot have it in the code of our translated program directly. So this is also necessary to get this dynamic flavor of vector in the actions. And such constraints are now processed by 2 rules. So if we want to modify a chunk C with no slot value pairs, then we are finished. And if we find a slot value pair in this list, then we want to add a chunk has slot constraint with this slot value pair and modify the rest. And since we want to do this for not only one action, but more than one action, so a rule can have arbitrary many actions, we also need an actions constraint that counts our actions. And this information is static. We know it at compile time. And if all actions have been processed, then we can add a new fire constraint so the next rule can fire. So this is important that our macro steps cannot be interfered during their modification process. Okay, let's look into an example. This is our well-known rule where we switch X and Y. So we modify a chunk in the retrieval buffer and exchange 2 slots. already have seen how the tests look like, and those tests contain variables x, y, and z. And the next step is that we have to create a new chunk, so we need a new chunk name, and this built-in constraint gives us a new chunk name and binds it to the variable c. Then we add the connection between the retrieval buffer and this new chunk c, and the delay is 0 because the modification is done instantly. And then we use our meta constraint mod to apply the values. So what we have now is that mother is y, father is x, and we add the values, copy the values from the old chunk, because it's only a modification. Requests look like this. Again, we have our tests with variables x, y, and z. And we have now a built-in constraint that calculates the request. And this is closely related to how ActR works. ActR has those modules where everything can happen, and there is some kind of function that calculates us the result. It gets a chunk as an input, and as an output it returns as a chunk. So we translate this request directly to this built-in request constraint and get a chunk name, a chunk type, and a list of slot value pairs. And what we do now is we connect this chunk to the retrieval buffer with delay 1, y1. As I said before, in our abstract semantics, we do not care about times, so we only need to know that this delay is greater than 0. So it is not accessible to the and not visible to the procedural system. And then we apply all slot value pairs that we get as a result by our meta constraint mod. Clearings work similarly to that. You find the definition in the paper, but I don't exemplify it in this talk. So now, as I said, in ActR, we have those requests that need some time, and they can be processed in parallel. We model that in our semantics by non-determinism. So sometimes it can also happen that no rule is applicable, but there is a request pending. And we apply this request non-deterministically, and this can then lead to new rules that can fire. But we can also do this if no rule is applicable or if a rule is applicable. We just do it non-deterministically. Because we don't care about the timing, we just assume it can happen anytime. We do this by this rule where we are able to fire rules. We don't interfere the application of some actions. We find a buffer B with the chunk of type T and name C and delay D. And if this delay is greater than 0, then we just change it to 0. So now this chunk is visible to the system. And as I said, it does not interfere the application of any actions because of this fire constraint. Okay, to conclude, what I have exemplified in this talk is the first translation of ActR models to CHR rules that suits the current operational semantics. The translation is formalized in the paper. I only gave examples in the talk. And it behaves equivalently to the original model, so it is sound and complete with respect to our operational semantics. But what we have to say is that our translation uses macro steps that are needed for some maintenance work to apply the actions. However, we only need finitely many CHR transitions to model one macro ActR step. The steps are deterministic and cannot be interfered, so they behave like one macro step. For the future, we want to investigate now how CHR analysis tools can be used on our translation for practical models. We did it in tests for example, for confluence analysis, but we want to see how they behave now for practical cognitive models. Therefore, we probably need the notion of so-called observable or invariant-based confluence, because the pure confluence is too strict for ACT-R usually, because it finds sources of non-confluence that aren't applicable for ACT-R, because ACT-R cannot land in such a state. CHR also offers some semi-automatic complexity analysis tools, and we want to see how they perform on our translation. And another line of research is how we can write a constraint solver of declarative memory or declarative knowledge. That is, as you have seen, the requests are modeled as built-in constraints, and we want to write a solver for that to do analysis and better analysis of declarative facts. So thank you for your attention. Well, you have to distinguish between such explicit temporality, like that a fact that is outdated at some point. Then you usually model it in ACT-R as another fact, which is probably quite accurate because it's also a fact that you know. So it's not part of the underlying ACT-R system. What you also have is implicit timings and so, for example, facts can be forgotten in ACT-R over time. And this is part of the modules behind the procedural system. So what I was talking about is only the procedural system, but where this forgetting happens is the module of the declarative memory. Because this is the theory about how humans forget and memorize knowledge. So it's hidden in this built-in constraint.
What is specific about ACT-R that makes it appropriate for you to map CHR to it and back?
Well, we didn't do it back, but well, ACT-R is very popular in the cognitive modeling community. There are also other cognitive architectures like SOAR or Clarion. We concentrated on ACT-R because it has this rule-based core that is also part of SOAR, but it also has a notion of sub-symbolic knowledge, so it can model stuff that we usually know from neural models. It seemed for us quite useful to do cognitive modeling, and we wanted to see how we could improve analysis on this language, but we are also firm that we can convert some of those stuff to, for example, SOAR, because it is also a rule-based theory.
I have a question, which is a detail. How do you estimate the delay? Because it depends maybe of how many things you have in your set.
So in this version of our semantics, we abstract from the correct timing. So what we want to have is, and this is important for what we want to do next, the confluence analysis, where we want to catch every possible transition that could happen, even if you don't know the timings. So we abstract, in this work we abstract from it, but of course in implementation semantics and in our refined semantics, it comes from the module. So the module has some parameters that are added to the chunks in it, for example, and there we get. This is also connected to this question about forgetting. So we get timings from the module. So a chunk that has been repeated a lot has a smaller delay than one that has been learned years ago and never been repeated, for example. Okay. So, but this is part of the modules.
Thank you. Daniel will also give the next presentation in place of Tom Fouvirt about why can't you behave of recursive rules with constraints.
Okay, so I hope this doesn't get too tedious now if one speaker is talking 1 hour. But okay, I'm jumping in for Tom Freewood. He couldn't be here, unfortunately. So I present this paper. It's called "Why Can't You Behave? Non-determination analysis of direct recursive rules with constraints." And as we all know, and as we already heard today, is that termination or the halting problem is undecidable in Turing-complete languages. And what we want to do now is we want to go the other way around, which is also, of course, undecidable. It is non-termination analysis. So we want to characterize non-terminating computations in CHR by a static program analysis method. So we want to give conditions for non-termination and for failure. This is in the setting of a rule-based language, constraint handling rules in the case of the paper. And in such rule-based languages, as you know, is that non-termination usually is through recursive rules. We think that our results can be transferred to other languages. So it's not limited to only constraint handling rules, but this is the starting point, and maybe there are ideas how to convert this to other languages. Throughout the talk, in the examples, we need a lot of this successor notation of natural numbers. So if you are not familiar with it, I give you a short introduction. So we consider 0 a natural number, and we consider every successor of a natural number a natural number. So if n is a natural number, then s of n is also a natural number. So 1 is represented as s of 0, 2 as s of 0 or s of 1. Sometimes I will say things like n plus 1 if you find s of n in the slides. To save brackets, we write s of n like this. So we define it as a unary operator, just that you don't get confused.
Why do you want to save brackets?
Yeah, because when I tested the talk, even those that were familiar with this were like, okay, where are the brackets? Okay. So you already have seen a little bit of constraint handling rules. I give you now an introduction by example. So we have 2 rules here, and we want to calculate the double of a natural number. Y is the double of the natural number x if x is 0, and then in that case y is also 0. So the double of 0 is 0. The next rule says if x is the successor of some x1, then we calculate the double of x1, which is y1, and the double of x is then y1 plus 2. So this is the simple program that we are talking about now. And I give you some simple example computations. So if we in CHR we can input variables, so we can have incomplete queries where not all variables are bound. If we start with this query, double xy, where x and y are variables, nothing will happen, because x is neither 0 nor is it the successor of some number. If x is 0, then the first rule is applicable, and we get x is 0 and y is 0 as a result. If x is 0 and y is the successor of some b, then also the first rule is applicable, and we get that y is 0 and y is the successor of some b, which is a contradiction. So this leads to failure. Now I want to show you, just that you get an idea, a successful computation of this program. We want to find the double of 1. Then this part is replaced by the application of the second rule. which gives us that y is y1 plus 2, so some new variable y1, and double of x1, y1, and x is 1, and x1 is still x1 is 0. Then we can apply the rule again on this, and we get that y is y1 plus 2, and y1 is 0, and we keep this part of the built-in store. So this is the result that we have in the end. So the double of 1 is 2, because y1 is 0, and we have that y is y1 plus 2. Now I give you a non-terminating example, and those are the examples that we are talking about in this presentation. So you wouldn't consider on the first glance that this program has inputs that don't terminate, but there is one, because CHR can also work on variables. We can just give this malicious input like x is the successor of some number, and x is the same as its double. So what happens now is we can apply the second rule, and we get that y is y1 plus 2. We want to calculate the double of x1 and save it in y1. This is what we still have from the input. And then we can apply, due to the fact that x1 is now the successor of some y1, because of this part here, we get an infinite recursion. And this is not just a simple circle that you could find by some static analysis of this. So it really, the store grows in every step. And we can reapply this rule again and again, and the store grows. So it's not just that we always use the same input to go into the recursion. As I said, constraint handling rules works on constraints that are first order logic predicates. And we have 3 types of rules. And in this talk, we talk about simplification rules that are very similar to the ones that we had in the last talk, but they are even simpler. We only can remove constraints. So we have, again, user-defined constraints in the head. We have built-in constraints in the guard, and a mix of built-in and user-defined constraints in the body. And if the head matches and the guard is true, then we add the constraints that we have in the body. For this talk, we also need the formal definition, so I give it quickly. So if we have a rule, H simplifies to B, that is a disjoint variant of some rule in our program, and we have variables x bar. And we are in the state where we have some constraints HS and some built-in constraints G, or just constraints G. And from a constraint theory, we find that the built-in constraints of our state are satisfiable. And for all, on the for all closure, we find that the built-in constraints of the state also imply that there is a matching of the constraints in the head of the rule and the constraints of the state. And the guard of the rule is true. Then we can do a transition via this rule R, where we add the body, we remove the matching constraints, we kept the rest of the constraints from the state, we add our matching, and we add the guard. So in the beginning, first I was talking about non-termination, but later on I said we also capture failure. So we call this misbehavior, this whole thing. So non-termination or failure is called misbehavior in this talk. So in a failed state, usually CHR implementations stop their computation, but if you look at this without this satisfiability check, it would mean that our program can run forever, because contradiction implies everything we want. Our condition will also give us transitions or rule applications that lead to failure. Just keep that in mind. So the first condition for misbehavior is quite simple. Suppose we have a rule with head H, guard C, and built-in constraints B in the body and user-defined constraints R in the body. And we have some disjoint variant of this. Then our basic misbehavior condition is that if the guard and the built-in constraints of the body are satisfiable, and they imply that we find that those built-in constraints on the right-hand side can be unified with the head of the disjoint variant, and the guard of this disjoint variant is true, and this implies non-termination of failure of the goal H and C through this rule. So what we have here is somehow an induction. So if we find that the head and the guard are satisfiable together, and they also imply that the next rule is applicable, then we are in a case where we have non-termination, because in the next step we can use this disjoint variant, produce a new disjoint variant of that, and the implication will still hold. So this is somehow an induction. So if you find this condition, then this goal implies non-termination. And we also have the other way around. If this condition does not hold, then this goal terminates. So now we can look into an example. This is the second rule of our double example. The basic misbehavior condition yields us the following. So x is equal to x1 plus 1, and y is equal to y1 plus 2. And on the right-hand side we have, we match double x1, y1, and double x prime, y prime, which is comes from our disjoint variant of the rule. So what we have basically is that x1 is equal to x prime and y1 is equal to y prime. And x prime is equal to x1 prime plus 1. The condition does not hold, so we can say that this goal here terminates and does not fail. So this theorem is very limited, as you see. So what we want to now we want to generalize this theorem to get more insight into non-termination. And therefore we add a built-in constraint Q to our rule and disjoint variants of it. And we also modify the general our misbehavior condition by adding Q to this satisfiability check, because of course for our test Q also must be satisfiable. Otherwise we are directly in a failed state. On the left-hand side of the condition we also need it, and we also need it on the right to be true on the right-hand side, because we want to ensure this for every step of our computation. So this condition now implies non-termination or failure of this goal H and C and this Q through the rule R. And this is now more general because we now capture more states by just adding arbitrary Qs. So let's see, look into a little example. We have a very simple rule that is not very useful. C of x, if x is not prime, then we want to add C of x plus 2. Our basic misbehavior condition amounts to this. So it exists an x that is not prime, and for all x we have that if x is not prime, then there is an x prime that is that equals C of x plus 2 and C of x prime, and this x prime is not prime. So what we have here now is for a non-prime number x, x plus 2 is also non-prime. But the successor of a non-prime number may be prime. For example, think of 9 and 11. So 9 is non-prime, but 11 is prime. So the condition does not hold. And therefore, this goal terminates according to our theorem 1. Let's now see our main or general misbehavior condition. We have that for all x, not prime of x implies that there is an x prime, such that x plus 2 is x prime, and this x prime is again not prime. And we can add a q and a q prime, as we have seen in our theorem 2. So what we have now is, for a non-prime number x and some condition q, x plus 2 is also non-prime. And now let this q be that x is odd. So what we have now is, for a non-prime number x that is odd, x plus 2 is also non-prime. So we are talking of equal. They don't contain a prime number, so the condition does hold. And therefore this goal is actually non-terminating. So we found a goal that leads us to non-termination of this rule. And we even defined, by this Q, defined somehow a class of inputs that gives us non-termination through this rule. Now apply this to our double example. So this is again our well-known double rule. Now let Q be x is equal to y. So we are analyzing this goal now. Then our basic misbehavior condition gives us this. And we find that this is a contradiction. So x1 must be y plus 1, and x1 must be the same as y1, which is a contradiction. So this implication does not hold, but this goal does still not terminate. So this is what I meant. The status of this goal is undecided by our theorem. So the other way around does not work as for the basic. So let's look into the next Q. Let Q now be x is greater or equal than y. So our misbehavior condition amounts to this, where we have this, instead of x prime is equal to y prime, we have greater than or equal. This can be simplified to this, where we find that x1 is greater than y1 plus 1, and x1 is greater or equal than y1, and equal to x1 prime, some x1 prime plus 1. And this condition actually holds. And therefore, this goal does not terminate or fail. So this is what I meant. So it does misbehave, but we actually know now that it fails by trying the goal. Yeah, this interesting is that this goal now it directly implies the goal from the example before, where we have x is equal to y, because if so this is a sub-goal of this basically. So now we also know that the goal from the example before, where we couldn't decide, does also not terminate. So we found that by a more general Q. Now we want to even generalize this theorem. So what we had now is that if all those conditions apply, then this goal, and exactly this goal, does does not terminate. In CHR we have a thing called monotonicity, which means that for every goal where a rule is applicable, every goal that has more constraints is still applicable. So we cannot, since we don't have negated constraints, we cannot tamper applicability of rules. So this gives us monotonicity, and this gives us the ability to state a new theorem 3, the containment theorem, where we can add arbitrary constraints to the state, to our goal, and if this condition holds, the same condition as before, it's still the case that this implies non-termination or failure. Yes? Awesome. Okay. So, to come to an end, what we have defined is some conditions for misbehavior, which means for failure or for non-termination, of direct recursive simplification rules of CHR. The idea was that we wanted to find a logical implication between the guard and the body building constraints of a rule. And this was this somehow induction proof that you find in the theorem. What those conditions give us is a general logical formulation of when a program can misbehave. We saw that that we have somehow defined a class of states that don't terminate for this program. And the basic misbehavior condition is, of course, not very general, but it is good to analyze termination behavior for one defined state that we get from the rule. So if you are only interested in this one state, and this is sometimes the case, you don't always allow every input, then this basic misbehavior condition suffices to analyze non-termination behavior. With our main misbehavior condition, we get this analysis of classes, of states where certain conditions hold and that lead to non-termination. This is a general approach for simple static termination analysis and a starting point for further research on how to generalize this even more. The difficulty, as you have seen, is how to find the right constraint Q that we add to the state. So for the future, we want to investigate how to find those constraints. So this question is likely undecidable because of the undecidability of the underlying problem. But there are ideas to find an iterative approach for approximations, or even systematic enumeration of possible constraints over the involved variables as pointed out by the reviewers. So another line of research would be to extend this approach to more general classes of CHR rules. So what we right now, this approach is restricted to simplification rules, but in CHR we also have propagation rules. This approach should work directly with propagation rules, we think, but we don't have the proof yet. So yes, this is future work. Also, we only had one CHR constraint in the body. We had arbitrary many built-in constraints, but we only had the recursive call as a CHR constraint in the body. So this is also a line of research to find out how can we include more CHR constraints in the body. And the idea is that we can approximate the calculation of the constraints by a built-in constraint. That gives us the answer as a built-in, and then it behaves like usual built-ins. And of course, right now we only had direct recursion, and another line of research would be to find out how can multiple or mutual recursive rules be analyzed with this idea. The converse of theorem 2, as we had it for theorem 1, does not hold. Maybe it is possible to find some weaker condition that gives us also the converse. And as I pointed out before, we also want to transfer this to other languages, like, for example, even imperative languages. Thank you very much. Yes.
There was that famous problem, the Koblitz conjecture. Maybe you know it. It's if you take a number, if it's 1, you stop. If it's even, you divide it by 2, continue. If it's odd, you multiply by 3, add 1, continue. And the conjecture is that event it always terminates with 1, but no one's been able to prove it. It's famous unsolvable problem. I was wondering what happens if you apply that by maybe it'll work.
Maybe. We haven't tried that, actually. It would be interesting.
How would it fail?
Well, we either find what was most likely is that we find that the guard and the body don't imply the head of the next two. If we don't find that, then we fail.
Other questions? Was this related to the previous talk of and the constraints that you used in translating from the directive, or it is an independent line?
This is an independent line of work, but through our translation, we could apply this maybe to XR. Since we now have the translation, we can use it to analyze.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank
Also,
you.
we have other questions. And
Can you use it?